The next commemorative lecture is to be given by the laureate in arts and philosophy, Mr. John Neumeier. Mr. John Neumeier, please come to the stage. Before the lecture, Mr. John Neumeier's profile will be introduced using the screen on the stage. Mr. John Neumeier was born in 1942 in Milwaukee, United States, as the second of the three brothers. This is a picture taken with the family. His father was a captain of the ship navigating the Great Lakes. He had a good sense of humor, always making the family happy with his jokes. His mother loved flowers, decorating the home every day, giving lots of joy to her family. Mr. Neumeier as a boy. It was at this time that he first saw a ballet performance. He felt very happy seeing beautiful costumes and dances. He went on to study at the Marquette University, famous for the theater department. Not only did he learn theater history, but also techniques of acting and dances. He was recognized for his potentials as a dancer, and he went on to the ballet school in Chicago to learn dancing further. After graduating from university, Mr. Neumeier went on to the Royal Ballet School in London, after which he joined the Stuttgart Ballet as a soloist as well as choreographer, and at the age of 27, he became the artistic director of the Frankfurt Ballet. In 1973, he became the artistic director of Hamburg Ballet, and up till today, he has continued to be in that position for over 40 years, making Hamburger Ballet one of the first-rate ballet companies in the world. Mr. Neumeier developed the traditional ballet techniques and has developed the unique techniques for choreography, skillfully expressing complex human psychology. He also works on the classical repertoire as well as on the adaptation of the literary works into ballet, bringing new interpretations and perspectives to give the audience inspiration who are moved with surprises. Mr. Neumeier takes the two mainstreams of the 20th century ballet, namely the dramatic ballet with emphasis on psychological portrayals and the abstract ballet with no storytelling, integrating the two so that the art of ballet has been raised a level higher. His works are well appreciated by the world's leading ballet companies as well as by the great dancers around the world wishing to add his repertoire in works in their repertoire. And by performing his works, they will develop further, thereby bringing the ballet world into further maturity. Mr. Neumeier not only creates ballet works, but he has set up ballet schools and youth ballet companies, giving great effort towards ballet education and development of the younger generation. To the young people who want to be artists, Mr. Neumeier gives the following advice. First, acquire the knowledge and skills that are necessary for reaching your goal, and then pursue your originality. He looks forward to see and feel Kyoto's traditional beauty and enjoy the No theater that he loves. Today, Mr. John Neumeier will talk about his views of art based on a deep insight on dance as a way to express emotions. The title of his lecture is Moving People, Dance as the Living Shape of Emotion. Now, Mr. John Neumeier, please.
Dr. Inamori, fellow prize recipients, ladies and gentlemen, to begin, I would like once more to express my sincere thanks, my gratitude, and the great joy I feel at receiving this prestigious award, the 2015 Kyoto Prize in the field of arts and philosophy, which I have accepted with deep humility. Standing before you today in the sublimely beautiful city of Kyoto, where I have several times had the privilege of presenting performances with my company, the Hamburg Ballet, and where I have also had the great pleasure of experiencing and being moved and inspired by the extraordinary No theater plays I have seen here, I'm reminded of certain events and encounters leading me along the path to becoming an Inamori Prize laureate. I recall that during my first year of university studies, a man who was to become the most important influence determining the direction of my life, Father John J. Walsh, of whom I will later speak more fully, took a sabbatical, traveling here to Japan to study Japanese traditional theater forms. Upon returning to the university, it was his enthusiastic and vivid descriptions of No and Kabuki theater that first fired my imagination and my own lifelong curiosity about and my fascination and love for Japan and its culture. I regret very much that this remarkable mentor cannot be with me today in Kyoto to complete the circle begun with his listening to his impassioned description and witnessing his demonstrations of the art and technique of No and Kabuki theater. Unfortunately, Father Walsh has passed away, but he is remembered along with many of whom I speak as I reflect on and recount the stations, stages, and experiences leading to my development as a dancer, choreographer, and artist. As long as I can remember, I have always wanted to dance, even before I knew exactly what dance was. Quite honestly, it would be impossible for me to determine a particular moment when I consciously decided to choose dance as my destiny. My first impressions of the art came from the Technicolor American films my mother took me to see. I loved the music, the color, and especially whenever the characters danced. I really became angry and found the cinema extremely boring when the movement stopped and the dancers started to talk. Of course, at home I tried to imitate what I'd seen on the stage in my family's living room, which could become an enormous stage as I threw myself about in what I thought at that moment was dance to any music which inspired me at the moment. This could be, I was drawn as a child to everything theatrical. This could be simply dressing up in improvised costumes and pretending to be someone else. At an early age, this act of transformation was for me the most interesting way of playing. Looking back at my childhood, one event remains unforgettable. It was a Sunday afternoon when my mother took me for the first time to see a live ballet performance. It was a matinee program of the Ballet Russe de Monte Carlo, which at that time passed annually through Milwaukee on tour. Approaching the theater, I didn't really know what to expect and was in great anticipation of what a ballet might really be. Finally, in my seat, really, really high up in the auditorium, as the auditorium darkened, the music began, the curtain went up on the ballet Coppelia. A ballerina entered the stage wearing a pink costume, a pink tutu, and began to dance on her toes, accompanied by the beautiful music of Delibes. Viewing this breathtaking performance from the extremely high perspective of the top gallery, I remember, as if it were yesterday, the feeling of excitement and exhilaration and happiness I felt at witnessing this, for me, incredible, unforgettable vision. I sat entranced while silently hoping and praying that the performers would not stop dancing and start talking. It was a great relief and pure pleasure that throughout this long program of varied ballets, no one said a word. This first introduction to ballet instilled in me an intense longing to become a part of this mysteriously beautiful world, a world that seemed, however, so far away for a child growing up in the Midwestern city of Milwaukee, Wisconsin, a city at that time having no professional ballet company and no major ballet school. Not only because of the high and distant perspective which I viewed this fantastic, astonishing spectacle, did the realm of dance seem so out of reach. I simply couldn't imagine how I could ever enter, could ever be worthy of entering that magical world. Although my thoughts about my future and what profession I wanted to pursue when I grew up changed regularly as a child, my interests had from the beginning, in one form or other, to do with what I later learned was art. Even my first wish, when I was really quite young, to become a Catholic priest was probably related to my fascination with theatrical things. Both my parents were Roman Catholic, and my mother was of Polish origin. Therefore, we very often attended the Polish church, an impressive and very ornate basilica, which was perhaps the most elaborately beautiful church in Milwaukee. Although a visit to church always had a sense of spirituality about it, I think it was also the strangely exotic candle-lit atmosphere, the evocative music and chanting, the incense, the ceremony of ritual entrances, processions, and liturgical gestures, which contributed to the feeling that the Mass itself was a form of theater. I felt drawn towards the spiritual life, but perhaps at the same time imagined myself dressed and transformed in the richly embroidered, colorful, and sometimes flowing vestments which the priests wore. They seemed to me men transformed, similar to the transformation I had experienced in my dress-up play. These moments in church, watching earnestly, solemn, but also dramatic spectacle, were so different from the normal, everyday life of a young boy growing up in Milwaukee. I longed to be part of this strange other world. The church service was clearly my first experience of art. From an early age, I had a talent for drawing, which was observed by an art teacher visiting our school periodically to evaluate the students' work. She strongly suggested that I should have additional drawing lessons. Therefore, I was enrolled in a traditional institution in Milwaukee called the Layton Art School, which was connected with a local art museum to study drawing and painting. However, I felt quite lost there, being at the time only 8 years old, while most of the other students were in their teens or older. Later, my parents heard about art studies at a nuns' convent. The nuns of the Notre Dame had a convent in Milwaukee where, on Saturday mornings, they taught drawing and painting. The curriculum consisted of a very very systematic, strict, and serious study program. We began at first still life drawing of fruit and flowers, sketching only with charcoal. After months, we progressed to adding color using pastel chalks. The next year, we began to study very slowly the process of learning watercolor technique. And much, much later, when our teacher felt the individual student was ready, we learned a precise method of oil painting. In retrospect, there was here in this process an important lesson for my future life. I came to understand that not only is the methodical way of learning the precise handwork of drawing and painting important, but I realized also that the quality of any art form depends on a learned, a practiced, and mastered technique. It became clear to me that essential to the freedom to create was the mastery of technique. Discipline in any art form ensures liberty and freedom to articulate during the spontaneous act of creation. For a choreographer, the training and discipline of his instrument, his own body, is essential. This technique, skill, or knowledge, however, is, of course, not a guarantee that the creative result will be inspired or a true work of art. Along with the valuable tool of technique, life experience teaches us to connect our work with reality, with the conflicts, challenges, and concerns of our fellow men. But that personal aspect, which makes a work of art unique and undeniably individual, can neither be learned, taught, nor calculated. Even the most perfect technique has not the power to evoke or force inspiration. In other words, there is no way of planning exactly how to become a great creator. It is truly an individual path. In my case, there seemed at first no plan at all, no certain clear direction indicated during my childhood. Although I was studying to be a painter, the urgency to dance persisted. The desire remained undeniable. I was finally allowed, I had wanted to take dance lessons. My parents didn't understand this request. I was finally allowed to take tap dancing lessons, claquette, because I guess they found that less harmful. Then eventually I progressed to acrobatic. Then finally I was allowed to study ballet in this very neighborhood school, and it was a strange experience, my first ballet class. It was like discovering and at the same time coming back to something that I knew was a part of me. The experience made me smile. However, feeling unworthy and ignorant of how I might ever enter the magical world of my dreams, I sometimes deliberately distracted myself with thoughts of other possible future professions. In my adolescence, for example, I was determined to become a psychiatrist. I imagined it was because the strange, somewhat abnormal, psychotic, or even supernatural aspects in human behavior had always fascinated me. I can't explain why, but the concept of madness, the shadowy side of human nature, did have great interest for me. Still standing at a crossroad, uncertain of what direction my future should take or could take, as a very young man, I entered Marquette University, majoring in English literature and theater studies, hoping to achieve a liberal arts education. But in fact, this attempt to pursue a strictly academic direction led me surprisingly in another. Marquette, a Jesuit university, was very well known for its excellent theater department, directed by a priest named Father John J. Walsh, of whom I spoke at the beginning of my address. Father Walsh not only taught theater history and the technique of acting based on Konstantin Stanislavski's method, but directed plays and musicals in a professionally functioning theater in which we performed almost every weekend. Our theater, Teatro Maria, was well known and extremely popular in the city. Father Walsh believed that dance was an important aspect in the education of an actor, and our curriculum included many movement classes. In the very first class which I attended, and which he, in fact, was himself teaching, he noticed me. Father Walsh seems to have seen my talent immediately and very soon convinced me that my calling, my vocation, was clearly to be a dancer. He arranged that, in addition to my dance studies at the university, I should have a scholarship to study at the Bentley Stone and Walter Cameron School of Ballet in Chicago, a city approximately 90 miles south of Milwaukee on Lake Michigan. As Father Walsh had also arranged for a ballet teacher, Sheila Riley, to come 3 times a week to Milwaukee to give dance classes to our theater department, I was able to have a very complete ballet education during my university years. Therefore, in addition to English literature, theater, and dance studies at the university, rehearsals and performances at Teatro Maria, I traveled twice each week, 1.5 hours by train to Chicago, and returned after 2 ballet classes with the night train, arriving in Milwaukee at 12:30 a.m. The next morning, however, I was determined not to miss my early lectures at the university. I will mention that on Thursdays each week, I had to clean and scrub the floors of the ballet studios in Chicago to pay, in a sense, for my scholarship, which complicated things. I was really terrible at that. I'm sure they had to do it all over again when I left. It was truly an intensely busy, challenging, but exhilarating time for me. But it was also at this time that the desire not only to dance, but to make and create dances ignited. At our Teatro Maria, I created my first choreography, arranging at first incidental dances for plays such as Hugo von Hofmannsthal's Everyman, and for musicals such as Annie Get Your Gun and Peter Pan. Later, I choreographed my first ballet, The Hound of Heaven, based on Francis Thompson's poem. At last, I had begun to realize the dream of creating a work entirely of movement, a choreography in which no one spoke or sung. This was symptomatic of my past and future because I designed the costume for this first ballet myself. An additional and extremely important influence in my development as a choreographer at that time was someone to whom Father Walsh had introduced me. She was Sybil Scherer, a modern dancer and dance creator who had been legendary in the 1940s and 50s in New York as a solo artist. Scherer was an extraordinary innovator, possessing an exceptionally individual, completely unique style and movement vocabulary, which was far ahead of its time. Being extremely sensitive and shunning the commercial aspects of her profession, Sybil had left the chaos and competition of the New York dance scene to settle in the serene harmony of the Middle West countryside. There, in Northbrook, between Milwaukee and Chicago, she lived and created dances inspired by a closeness and communion with nature. Working in her beautifully designed house, she created solo dances, but also worked with a group to make choreography with a small group of dancers. I was fortunate to become one of the few dancers working with and learning from this unique artist. Sybil's dancing and choreography had surely the greatest single influence on my own later movement vocabulary. Her invention seemed to flow from an inner, secret, spiritual source, impressing the spectator with the wonder of her original movement invention, dynamic, and unforgettable physical images. It is difficult in words to express or describe the particular quality or emotional impact of these extraordinary dances. Sybil, for example, was the first person who could make me laugh through dance without reference to text or narrative comic situation. All was communicated by means of physical coordination and emotional commitment. Instinctively, one could recognize in the disconnected, incongruous, and isolated movement one's own human frailty, weakness, confusion, and sometimes desperation. While astounding and moving us, her dance made us laugh. The relentless energy of her sometimes unexpectedly aggressive movement was a revelation to me. A violence impossible to realize within the vocabulary of classical ballet erupted in the strength of her precise and percussive movements. But perhaps most unique was Sybil's lyric quality, evident in her unbelievable balance, in her soft but heavy port de bras and upper body movement, which created a modern lyricism. Modern art, modern dance seems so much more adept and capable to express aggression, to portray chaos and to distort. Sybil invented a completely new form of dance lyricism, a poetic movement quality which had nothing to do with the romantic gestures and cliché poses of the 19th century ballet, but suggested rather the sublime concentration of the no dancer. This was the truly pure, the spiritual in movement. Only later did all this, which I had been fortunate enough to see, to learn, and be part of, unconsciously become, in another form, part of my own choreography. The work with Sybil, which meant commuting to Northbrook several times a week, added, of course, another degree of stress to university studies, theater productions, and ballet classes in Chicago. It was, however, dancing with Sybil's small group that I was first noticed by a major critic, Claudia Cassidy, who was a highly respected but very feared writer for the Chicago Tribune newspaper. Reviewing the first concert in which I danced, Cassidy wrote primarily of the genius of Sybil herself. But near the end of her article, she wrote, "Among the dancers, there was a tall, dark-haired boy named John Neumeier, who made you watch him without trying. I'm very much afraid he's a dancer." The third influential person in my development as an artist was Vera Volkova, a teacher of classical ballet. After graduating from Marquette University, I was determined to concentrate completely on my classical ballet studies, considering this technique to be the most challenging but most complete discipline to prepare myself ultimately for the freedom to create. During the university years, there had been so many diverse activities demanding energy and attention that I felt the concentration on a single discipline, that of classical ballet, was necessary to properly finish my studies and prepare myself for a successful professional career. Initially, I had intended to study at the School of the Royal Danish Ballet, where Vera Volkova was ballet mistress. In answer to my question, who was the greatest teacher in the world for male dancers, an acquaintance from the New York City Ballet replied, Vera Volkova in Copenhagen. I was determined, therefore, to study with Volkova. In the last moment, however, I discovered that it was at the time impossible for a foreigner to study in the Danish school. I then decided to go to the Royal Ballet School in London. The atmosphere, however, seemed cold, completely impersonal, negative, and uncreative. Feeling quite depressed, I visited Vera Volkova during the Easter holiday. In early spring, my encounter with the émigré Russian teacher truly promised springtime for me, and she changed my professional life. Immediately sympathetic, positive, and extremely kind, she proceeded to give me private lessons. Volkova gave me confidence, was encouraging, And it was her skill as a perceptive pedagogue who used a spontaneous repertoire of verbal images to underscore her corrections that made a professional ballet dancer of me. After our first meeting, I returned several times to work with this remarkably inspiring teacher. She sensed in me the potential to be a creative artist and was the first in Europe to encourage my instinctive desire to become a choreographer. It was, however, at the Royal Ballet School in London that a strange series of coincidences and seemingly missed chances occurred that determined the next step in my journey. During a class in character dance, I was discovered by the ballerina of the Stuttgart Ballet, Marcia Heide, who visited our school with her partner, Ray Barra. Barra would later play a very important role in the establishment of my first company in Frankfurt, becoming my ballet master and close associate. Several days before their first visit, the director of the Royal Ballet, Ninette de Valois, who had rehearsed and coached me for a school performance in Roland Petit's ballet, Ballet, finding me talented, promised to speak to George Balanchine, director of the New York City Ballet, about me during the forthcoming tour of the Royal Ballet to the USA. At that time, a career in the British Royal Ballet was impossible because foreign dancers were not allowed to be employed in England. Heide and Barra, in the meantime, had offered me a job with John Cranko's new company in Stuttgart, a city I had never heard of. I considered their offer interesting, but waited for de Valois' return and her news. When at last she did return, de Valois passed me in the school hallway without so much as a word. Immediately, I accepted and signed the Stuttgart contract. Incredibly, several days later, again passing de Valois in the corridor, she stopped and coolly explained that she had spoken to Balanchine and that I could join the New York City Ballet in autumn. However, feeling responsibility to the already signed agreement, I declined Balanchine's offer and made plans to begin my professional career in Stuttgart, expecting to spend just 1 year in Germany. How different the course of my artistic quest would have been had the timing been otherwise, and I would have returned to America after that 1 year in England. But I joined the Stuttgart Ballet, became a soloist, and after a time resumed my creative activities, choreographing ballets for the young choreographers group in Stuttgart called Die Nouvelle Gesellschaft. One of my first works was the Ballet Haiku, inspired by Yukio Mishima's modern no play Hanjo, but based finally on a lovely haiku written in the Japanese poetic form by my friend Joan Schwartz. Becoming a great public and critical success, the Ballet Haiku was filmed for German television. Another Japanese connection. It was precisely this ballet for which I designed and in fact sewed myself the Japanese-inspired costumes that was influential in determining my future. The success of the Ballet Haiku resulted in invitations to create works for companies in America and England and led to the offer to become director of the Frankfurt Ballet. Frankfurt was particularly important for me as it was there that I began to formulate and develop my concept of a modern ballet ensemble and experimented with new forms for traditional ballets such as my version of The Nutcracker, Daphnis and Chloe, and Le Sacre, ballets which remain in the repertoire of my company today. After less than 3 years in Frankfurt, I was offered the directorship of the much larger, more prestigious ballet in Hamburg, where I've remained artistic director until the present date, now unbelievably in my 43rd year. When I consider the development of my life and work in light of what I have related in the long part of my address, the diverse threads of my past education, inclinations, and experiences seem strangely to have been woven into the fabric of my present situation and existence. Although the calling to the priesthood, the possibility of becoming a painter, and for a time imagining a career as a psychiatrist may seem unrelated to the burning desire to express myself in dance, I suppose that this combination of dreams, longings, and various interests did, in fact, come together in my eventually becoming a choreographer. A choreographer designs and paints with human beings in time and space. So of necessity, a combination of movement and design is always present in choreography. Also, in the type of ballet that interests me, the honest psychological motivation of the characters was always an important factor, resulting from a continued interest in psychiatry, which began in puberty. Analysis of the forms and manifestations of madness and its possible expression in dramatic dance situations find a prominent place in some of my most successful ballets. For A Streetcar Named Desire, an emphatic understanding of the interior landscape of the central character, Blanche Dubois, was of paramount importance in portraying through movement this tragic figure from Tennessee Williams' well-known drama. Without a personal imagining of the inner emotional structure of such a person, creating Blanche would have been impossible or merely superficial. Perhaps most importantly, my lifelong fascination with the Polish-Russian dancer, choreographer, painter, and humanist Wacław Nijinsky would be the most convincing example of how my early occupation with psychiatry manifested itself in one of my most well-known, successful, and moving dance portraits, the ballet Nijinsky, created in the year 2000. Already at age 11, I read a biography of Nijinsky, The Tragedy of Nijinsky, written by his school comrade Anatole Bormann. My fixation with this great artist had, from that moment, not only to do with the sensational aspects of his legendary performances and glamorous life as the superstar of Diaghilev's Ballet Russe, but with the private Václav and the tragedy of his descent into madness. This early fascination and later psychological research into the exact nature of Nijinsky's madness became an essential part of the ballet Nijinsky, as well as in the ballet Le Pavillon d'Armide, and earlier in my version of Le Sacre de Printemps, entitled simply Le Sacre. In my version of Stravinsky's masterpiece, the final dance of the chosen Virgin was, in fact, inspired by eyewitness accounts of Nijinsky's last dance in the Hotel Souvretta House on the afternoon of January 19th, 1919. Of course, becoming and remaining a director for more than 45 years now, one must, of necessity, become a kind of psychiatrist to deal with artists. That group of very uniquely individual, extremely sensitive, highly emotional, and very delicate people who, in their desire to realize themselves as artists, sometimes need psychological guidance. Also, religious beliefs and the fascination with the spiritual aspects of humanity have continued to this day to concern me and form an important theme in such ballets as The Silence, Messiah, Requiem, Magnificat, and most importantly, in the St. Matthew Passion. Like pieces of mosaic stones, all these early interests, intuitions, desires, and dreams have now come to form the complete picture of myself as a man, a choreographer, and an artist. Recalling and recounting for this address the experiences leading to my development as an artist, it becomes clear to me that the seemingly diverse, if not diametrically opposed events encountered on my quest have in fact not only resulted in the reality of becoming an actively working and prolific choreographer, but have contributed to the formation of a very personal definition of dance itself. Although rooted in the values and experiences of the past, my definition is not merely theoretical and intellectually proposed, but has unconsciously evolved and has been practically realized and manifested in the more than 150 ballets which I have created. In researching the nature and specific function of the art, one must first determine that particular aspect unique to dance alone, which is its essence. It is important to understand that when I speak of dance, I'm referring to theater dance and not to any form of folk or ballroom dance in which the pleasure is derived from the actual doing of the dance itself rather than its presentation and the consequential emotional response. I am discussing dance as an art form performed by professionals who hope wordlessly to communicate with an observing audience. I believe this art is unique, firstly, in that it presupposes the living presence of the dancer and depends for its effect on his skills in execution and the radiating power of his presence. The human being is therefore of necessity its center. This central human being is also both instrument for and subject of every ballet. Like any performing instrument, the human body must be trained, must become articulate in order to communicate directly and most freely with other human beings. These observing human beings possess the same instrument. Their body, as well as the completeness of their humanity, and may therefore relate intimately to the wordless images projected from the stage. Dance is not communicated rationally. It is impossible to understand ballet. This particular art form cannot, to any degree, communicate specific information. It is impossible, for instance, to communicate abstract ideas or facts. You cannot dance the daily news. CNN does it much better anyway. Nor is dance a form of sign language in which a particular gesture may pragmatically convey a specific rational meaning. In dance, wordlessly recognizable feelings, sensations, and emotions are projected to an audience who, without understanding facts, dates, or clarifying tenses, recognize a familiar emotion directly with reference to his own humanity. One human being dancing for an audience of fellow human beings might be compared to a violin playing a violin concerto to an audience of violins. Who better senses what being bowed or plucked upon feels like more than a violin itself? Certainly better than a grand piano that may also be in the audience. Who better then to feel the exhilarating power of an enormous leap, the elevating magic of a dancer's sustained balance on her toes, or the pain of a body contorted in grief, than a creature sharing the same essential nature? Certain ballets or dance performances can, of course, use literature, history, biography, or even music itself as its theme. In witnessing the performance, however, it is not the literary or other rational reference that is paramount to our experience, but rather the direct emotional impact projected through movement images, specific physical dynamics, and the emotional commitment of the dancer that moves the audience. While watching the romantic tragedy of Romeo and Juliet, we do not cry at the end of the ballet for Shakespeare's Renaissance lovers, but rather as an emotional response to the actual live performing dancers who have moved us to tears with conviction of their interpretation. Even when using historical figures such as Václav Nijinsky, as I did in my ballet created in 2000, or Eleonora Duse, the famous Italian actress about whom I am at present moment creating a new work, the present living incarnation is essential for the success of the performance. Dance can seldom function as a documentary medium or historical lesson. And it is, therefore, the human presence created in the ballet because of the choreographer's subjective reaction to the facts studied or the inspiration gained from the myths surrounding an historical figure which moves us. My intention as a choreographer is to give emotional shape to the truth of a character, his relationships or the human situations in which he is involved by means of selected or invented movements. Of course, our rational knowledge of any particular subject may help in providing a more complex, more complete, many-layered frame of reference or comprehension. The Nijinsky scholar, for example, familiar with all the facts and aspects of the dancer's life, has additional pleasure while watching the performance in recalling those incidents or situations suggested in my ballet. The fan or expert of the actress Eleonora Duse may be disappointed or upset by the portrayal of certain relationships envisaged in my ballet, which he sees in a completely different light. But the fact that some of the strongest ballets, some also in my own repertoire, have been created depicting nameless characters whose existence is inspired solely by the emotional tension felt while hearing music, by the choreographer's instinctive choices, or by an inspiring dancer. Whatever historical period or epoch a choreographer may wish to suggest in his ballet, whether prehistoric China, 18th century France, or Renaissance Italy, when the theater curtain rises, the performance takes place in the present. What we see, the action, is happening now. It is the living presence, the concentration and involvement of the dancers there now that reminds us of some part of ourselves. Dance speaks only in the present tense. There has never been, nor I think ever will be, a movement which signifies yesterday I loved or tomorrow I will kill. We understand, we relate only to what we see in this moment expressed through movement. Movement itself, being a primary sign of life, underlines the premise of dance as an essentially living art. It is also ever-changing, and change is again an important sign of life. A ballet changes with each performance. No two performances are identical. This is the great challenge, the fascinating tension of live performance. The dance does not exist. All my choreographies do not exist unless performed, unless embodied, incarnated in the interpretation of living dancers. Let me remark that film can, of course, capture a dance performance, making it, in a sense, eternal, so long, that is, as the material substance survives. Dance films are basically of two types, and each serves quite a different purpose. I myself use film every day working on a new creation to be able later, in a situation more quiet and peaceful than the rehearsal room itself, to study more objectively what has been accomplished during the intense hours of creation. It is interesting that it is exactly the distance which a film sequence provides me with, compared to the emotionally charged atmosphere during the act of creation, that makes such film documents useful in rationally evaluating the results of a rehearsal. Also, the fact that the camera may pick one particularly extraordinary moment during spontaneous, inspired improvisations, which are never again realized during the creative process, that make such materials especially valuable. This type of ballet film is of great importance as a tool during the working process or as a document recording the process of creation, but it is meant for the private use of the choreographer or for archival purposes only, and is never intended to be seen by the general public. It is part of the laboratory of the choreographer. Archival in nature are also the films made to document the performance of a ballet in any particular moment of its existence. Again, such films are meant to capture a specific interpretation or version intended to document the status quo of a ballet or record subsequent changes. Dance film may, however, also become a work of art in itself. In this case, an exact plan and schedule must be made with precisely planned multiple camera angles, numerous takes, and extremely careful editing. The enormous possibilities of this medium have also fascinated me for many years, and I have been involved either directing myself or working closely with the film director, cameraman, and editors to ensure that the result will represent in a completely other medium the original intention of the ballet. I do believe it is possible to make wonderful ballet films of high artistic quality. Such films have the added advantage of determining, because of the close-up and selective editing, the focus of the viewer, who, in a live performance, distracted by the confusion of the whole picture, may have trouble following the principal action. Again, this medium is clearly related to my early studies and interests in drawing and painting. Following the movement, for example, of a single arm in close-up, dancing through the dimension of a cinema screen may result in a unique film form of truly moving choreography, making use of the technical possibilities of modern medium. Film is, however, clearly a different genre and can, I believe, never ever replace or become a substitute for the impact, suspenseful and exciting experience of watching the living dancer's performance. Ballet must be constantly reborn. New life must be bestowed anew at each and every performance. As creator in choreography, this living nature of dance means for me personally that none of all the many ballets I have created is completed. The constantly changing and evolving nature of my ballets is quite different to that of a finished painting hanging in a gallery or a published book on a library shelf. I consider each a work in progress until the day I die. Watching a performance of my work, I observe critically, reserving the right to correct, to change, and rework. The challenge for me is trying to see each ballet as if for the first time. This act of constantly seeing an old work as new is for me part of the responsibility, but wonderful, of adventure, which keeps me also in a constant state of movement. To evaluate, criticize, and determine the current validity and relevance and honesty of each work as it is being performed now, I must first ask myself, do I believe what I see? And most importantly, does it move me? If my work does not move me, if I can no longer find a part of me in my work, why should it affect anyone else? Never have I been able to create characters in a ballet whose attributes, qualities, or even negative aspects I could not find in some degree as a part of my own human nature. I must use my creative imagination to determine if I could possibly be the vain, unhappy lover, Don Juan, if I could feel the forgiving love of Julie in Lilium, or if I could experience the heartless, jealous hate of Iago in Otello. Honestly, honesty is essential to the dancer's projection of emotion. I, as a choreographer, must believe that there could, in reality, exist such a situation as I have created, that in a given situation, the dancer's actions are inevitable, and that such an imagined relationship, harmonious or troubled, is true and possible. To achieve a truthful interpretation, I believe a dancer must work not only on the physical, technical demands of a role during creation and rehearsal, but begin to work on the emotional structure of his character, allowing it to evolve dramatically with each performance. A dancer must enter the stage with and for an action, be aware of what he is doing, and find a verb in every one of his movements. I believe, therefore, the primary source of movement is human emotion. Movement's primary purpose in theater dance is, by means of movement, to move others. Dance is, for me, the living shape of emotion. As an art, dance must reflect the human being in his entirety, including intellect, sensuality, and spiritual aspiration. Therefore, as choreographers, our themes are as infinite as all human experience, and in no sense limited to that which is simply entertaining or merely concrete. For me, the struggle of the spirit to understand its relationship with a higher existence, a dialogue with God, has always been one of my most important themes. Therefore, of all my works, the most important and profound is perhaps my ballet to Johann Sebastian Bach's St. Matthew Passion. In this work, I have, inspired by Bach's deeply religious music, explored with simple narratives and the response or meditation on its central themes, the essential elements of the universal human condition, meaning community, betrayal, violence, vengeance, and the power of forgiveness and love. The St. Matthew Passion is for me the prime example of the possibility dance may possess to embody a universally comprehended language. Reflecting today on my long relationship with Japan, I would like in conclusion to recall a thought from my yesterday acceptance speech. I've always considered it a great honor and responsibility to be an artist. The possibility of wordlessly communicating in the work I love to do some part of my worldview, my personal feelings and philosophy, I consider one of the greatest privileges of my vocation. The power dance may have to move people, to suggest a possible harmonious existence, and to transmit a message of peace and reconciliation, found one of its most profound realizations here in this country during the Hamburg Ballet's first visit to Japan. The presentation of my ballet, St. Matthew Passion, on the 16th of February 1986 in Hiroshima remains an unforgettable high point of my long career because it combined an aesthetic statement with a healing vision of atonement. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Now to Mr. John Neumeier, flower bouquet is going to be presented. Please. Mr. John Neumeier, thank you very much indeed.